Hey, sweet friends. I wanted to share with you today one of my most favorite resources that I use when studying the Bible and preparing to teach my messages. I often get asked questions about resources, so here we go. This is probably one of my favorites. It is called How to Read the Bible as Literature and Get More Out of It by Leland Ryken. Absolutely love this resource, and I will tell you why. When we study scripture or prepare to teach it, we want to exegete scripture. In other words, we want to pull out of scripture the original meaning, the meaning according to the original author, instead of what we call eisegeting the text, where we are reading our own meaning into it. And there are different ways that we go about exegeting scripture, which I'm not going to go into today because that's not the point of this little message. But I will just give you a few examples. So, for example, when we are studying the Bible and we're wanting to understand the original author's intent and meaning in writing it to us, we want to look at things like the historical context, who wrote it, who was the author, what was his purpose in writing it. We want to look at the theological context, how does it fit into the bigger storyline of the Bible. And another thing that we look at is the literary genres, and that is where Leland Ryken's book comes in and where I absolutely get my worship on, because what we see in scripture is that God has spoken to us through a wide variety of literary genres and literary devices. And so, for example, he speaks to us through narrative or story. He speaks to us through proverbs. He talks to us through visionary literature. And all of these different genres should be read in different ways. And when we know how to identify the different genres of writing in which God's speaking to us, then we are going to see scripture come alive in a whole new way. So I'm going to give you a few examples. I spoke last year, I taught on the book of Proverbs in my local church. And so the first thing I did as I was looking at the historical context and the theological context and the literary genre of Proverbs was to just pause and marvel at the way God has packaged truth to us in the book of Proverbs. So think with me for a moment. Proverbs is about how to live out God's wisdom on the street levels of life. Okay? Well, God has spoken to us in the Proverbs by packaging truth in short, pithy statements. That's what a proverb is. It's a short, pithy statement. And so we see that God has spoken truth to us through these short, pithy statements. And think with me about how perfect this is for when you are living on the street levels of life, right? When you engage in a conversation with someone and maybe they start getting heated toward you, how helpful is it to have a proverb, which is truth packaged in a short, pithy statement, pop up in your mind that says a gentle answer turns away wrath, right? And so we see that for example, how much more helpful is that truth coming to you in a short, pithy statement in the form of a proverb rather than some long memory verse in the moment, right? Absolutely powerful. Another example is when God speaks to us through narrative. In this book, How to Read the Bible as Literature, he gives you some tips for interpreting narratives. And one of the things he says is look out for irony. Oftentimes there is irony in narratives. Well, I am teaching the book of Acts in my local church this year, which is a narrative, and it's a historical narrative. And I was teaching on Acts chapter 9, which you should check that message out on my website at adoringchrist.org. But I was teaching on the conversion of Saul, as we know now as the Apostle Paul. And it's absolutely amazing because in that text, Saul, when we meet him, he is ravaging the church. He is persecuting the early church. He is getting orders and going to Damascus to hunt and to find Christians and to bring them back to Jerusalem to punish them and to persecute them. And having read this book that gives you some tips on things to think through in narrative, having read the point that says look for irony in narratives, it dawned on me how ironic it was that as Paul is hunting Christians to persecute them, all of a sudden we begin to realize that the living Jesus is hunting Paul, that the hunter has become the hunted. And in the passage, we see that Jesus reveals himself to Saul, and Saul has a conversion experience, a radical conversion experience. And at first you would think, well, this is poetic justice, right? I mean, the hunter has become the hunted. But what you see in the text is that it's not poetic justice, because when Jesus hunts Paul and reveals himself to Paul, he does not deal justice to him, but he gives him saving grace, that he reveals himself to Paul, and Paul is converted by grace, by sovereign grace, and he is reconciled back to God through Jesus Christ. And so, as the subtitle of this book says, how to read the Bible as literature and get more out of it, you really do get more out of it when you start thinking through these things as you are studying and teaching Scripture. It is really amazing to see it come alive. So I hope that you might enjoy this resource yourself. All right, stay tuned for more.